Eritrea, officially the state of Eritrea, is a country in the Horn of Africa. With its capital at Asmara, it is bordered by Sudan in the west, Ethiopia in the south, and Djibouti in the southeast. The northeastern and eastern parts of Eritrea have an extensive coastline along the Red Sea, across from Saudi Arabia and Yemen. The nation has a total area of approximately 117,600 square kilometers, and includes the Dar Lake Archipelago and several of the Hanish Islands. Its name Eritrea is based on the Greek name for the Red Sea, which was first adopted for Italian Eritrea in 1890. Eritrea is a multi-ethnic country, with 9 recognized ethnic groups in its population of around 6 million. Most residents speak Afro-Asiatic languages, either of the Semitic or Cushitic branches. Among these communities, the Tigrinya make up about 55% of the population, with the Tigray people constituting around 30% of inhabitants. In addition, there are a number of Nilo-Saharan-speaking Nilotic ethnic minorities. Most people in the territory adhere to Christianity or Islam. The Kingdom of Aksum, covering much of modern-day Eritrea and northern Ethiopia, rose somewhere around the 1st or 2nd centuries and adopted Christianity around the time Islam had spread through Egypt and the Levant. In medieval times much of Eritrea fell under the Medri-Bara kingdom, with the smaller region being part of Hamasien. The creation of modern-day Eritrea is a result of the incorporation of independent, distinct kingdoms and sultanates, eventually resulting in the formation of Italian Eritrea. In 1947 Eritrea became part of a federation with Ethiopia, the Federation of Ethiopia and Eritrea. Subsequent annexation into Ethiopia led to the Eritrean War of Independence, ending with Eritrean independence following a referendum in April 1993. Hostilities between Eritrea and Ethiopia persisted, leading to the Eritrean-Ethiopian War of 1998 to 2000 and further skirmishes with both Djibouti and Ethiopia. Eritrea is a member of the African Union, the United Nations, and IGAD, and is an observer in the Arab League. Name: during the Middle Ages, the Eritrea region was known as Medri-Bara. The name Eritrea is derived from the ancient Greek name for Red Sea. It was first formally adopted in 1890, with the formation of Italian Eritrea. The territory became the Eritrea Governorate within Italian East Africa in 1936. Eritrea was annexed by Ethiopia in 1953 and an Eritrean Liberation Front formed in 1960. Eritrea gained independence following the 1993 referendum, and the name of the new state was defined as State of Eritrea in the 1997 constitution. History: prehistory at Baya in Eritrea. One of the oldest hominids representing a possible link between Homo erectus and an archaic Homo sapiens was found by Italian scientists, dated to over 1 million years old. It is the oldest skeletal find of its kind and provides a link between hominids and the earliest anatomically modern humans. It is believed that the section of the Danakil Depression in Eritrea was also a major player in terms of human evolution, and may contain other traces of evolution from Homo erectus hominids to anatomically modern humans. During the last interglacial period, the Red Sea coast of Eritrea was occupied by early anatomically modern humans. It is believed that the area was on the route out of Africa that some scholars suggest was used by early humans to colonize the rest of the Old World. In 1999, the Eritrean Research Project team composed of Eritrean, Canadian, American, Dutch and French scientists discovered a Paleolithic site with stone and obsidian tools dated to over 125,000 years old near the Bay of Zula south of Massawa, along the Red Sea littoral. The tools are believed to have been used by early humans to harvest marine resources like clams and oysters. According to linguists, the first Afro-Asiatic-speaking populations arrived in the region during the ensuing Neolithic era from the families Proposia Heimat in the Nile Valley, or the Near East. Other scholars propose that the Afroasiatic family developed in situ in the Horn, with its speakers subsequently dispersing from there. Antiquity Punt together with Djibouti, Ethiopia, northern Somalia, and the Red Sea coast of Sudan. Eritrea is considered the most likely location of the land known to the ancient Egyptians as Punt, whose first mention dates to the 25th century BC. The ancient Puntites were a nation of people that had close relations with pharaonic Egypt during the times of Pharaoh Sahuri and Queen Hatshepsut. In 2010, a genetic study was conducted on the mummified remains of baboons that were brought back as gifts from Punt by the ancient Egyptians, led by a research team from the Egyptian Museum and the University of California. The scientists used oxygen isotope analysis to examine hairs from two baboon mummies that had been preserved in the British Museum. One of the baboons had distorted isotopic data, so the other's oxygen isotope values were compared to those of present-day baboon specimens from regions of interest. The researchers found that the mummies most closely matched modern baboon specimens in Eritrea and Ethiopia, which they suggested implied that Punt was likely a narrow region that included eastern Ethiopia and all of Eritrea. Culture excavations at Sembel found evidence of an ancient pre-Aksumite civilization in Greater Asmara. This urban culture is believed to have been among the earliest pastoral and agricultural communities in the Horn region. Artifacts at the site have been dated to between 800 BC and 400 BC, contemporaneous with other pre-Aksumite settlements in the Eritrean and Ethiopian highlands during the mid-1st millennium BC. Additionally, the Honor culture may have had connections with the ancient land of Punt. In a tomb in Thebes dated to the reign of Pharaoh Amenophis II, long-necked pots similar to those made by the Honor people are depicted as part of the cargo in a ship from Punt. Gash group excavations in and near Agordat in central Eritrea yielded the remains of an ancient pre-Aksumite civilization known as the Gash group. Ceramics were discovered that were related to those of the C group pastoral culture, which inhabited the Nile Valley between 2500–1500 BC. Some sources dating back to 3500 BC, shards akin to those of the Kerma culture, another community that flourished in the Nile Valley around the same period, were also found at other local archaeological sites in the Barka Valley belonging to the Gash group. According to Peter Behrens and Marianne Beach-Orsgurst, linguistic evidence indicates that the C group and Kerma peoples spoke Afroasiatic languages of the Berber and Cushitic branches, respectively. Kingdom of D. Mount was a kingdom that encompassed most of Eritrea and the northern frontier of Ethiopia. The polity existed during the 10th to 5th centuries BC. Given the presence of a massive temple complex, its capital was most likely at Yeha. Kahito, often identified as the town of Kolo in the periplus of the Erythraean Sea, as well as Matara were important ancient D-Mount kingdom cities in southern Eritrea. The realm developed irrigation schemes, used plows, grew millet, and made iron tools and weapons. After the fall of D-Mount in the 5th century BC, the plateau came to be dominated by smaller successor kingdoms. This lasted until the rise of one of these polities during the 1st century, the Kingdom of Aksum, which was able to reunite the area. Kingdom of Aksum. The Kingdom of Aksum was a trading empire centered in Eritrea and northern Ethiopia. It existed from approximately 100–940 AD, growing from the Proto-Aksumite Iron Age period c. 4th century BC to achieve prominence by the 1st century AD. According to the medieval Liber Aksumi, Aksum's first capital, Mazaba, was built by Eteopas, son of Cush. The capital was later moved to Aksum in northern Ethiopia. The kingdom used the name Ethiopia as early as the 4th century. The Aksumites erected a number of large stelae, which served a religious purpose in pre-Christian times. One of these granite columns, the obelisk of Aksum, is the largest such structure in the world, standing at 90 feet. Under Ezana, Aksum later adopted Christianity. In the 7th century, early Muslims from Mecca also sought refuge from Quraysh persecution by traveling to the kingdom, a journey known in Islamic history as the First Hijrah. It is also the alleged resting place of the Ark of the Covenant and the purported home of the Queen of Sheba. The kingdom is mentioned in the Periplus of the Erythraean Sea as an important marketplace for ivory, which was exported throughout the ancient world. Aksum was at the time ruled by Zoscales, who also governed the port of Agilis. The Aksumite rulers facilitated trade by minting their own Aksumite currency. The state also established its hegemony over the declining kingdom of Kush and regularly entered the politics of the kingdoms on the Arabian Peninsula, eventually extending its rule over the region with the conquest of the Himyarite kingdom. Middle Ages Medri Bara. After the decline of Aksum, the Eritrean highlands were under the domain of Bar Negus, ruled by the Bar Negus. The area was then known as Mar'ik Labar. It was later renamed under Emperor Zara Yacob as the domain of the Bar Negus, the Medri Bara, with its capital at Debawa. The state's main provinces were Hamasien, Serra and Aquila Guzai. The Scottish traveller James Bruce reported in 1770 that Medri Bara was a distinct political entity from Abyssinia, noting that the two territories were frequently in conflict. The Bara Nagassi alternately fought with or against the Abyssinians and the neighbouring Muslim Adal Sultanate depending on the geopolitical circumstances. Medri Bara was thus part of the Christian resistance against Imam Ahmad ibn Ibrahim al-Ghazi of Adal's forces, but later joined the Adalite states and the Ottoman Empire front against Abyssinia in 1572. That 16th century also marked the arrival of the Ottomans, who began making inroads in the Red Sea area. Ossa Sultanate. At the end of the 16th century, the Ossa Sultanate was established in the Denkal lowlands of Eritrea. The polity had come into existence in 1577, when Muhammad Jassa moved his capital from Hara to Ossa with the split of the Adal Sultanate into Ossa and the Sultanate of Hara. At some point after 1672, Ossa declined in conjunction with Imam Mu'adh bin Adam's recorded ascension to the throne. In 1734, the Afar leader Kadafu, head of the Mudaito clan, seized power and established the Mudaito dynasty. This marked the start of a new and more sophisticated policy that would last into the colonial period. Habesh Eyalet. By 1517, the Ottomans had succeeded in conquering Medri Bara. They occupied all of northeastern present-day Eritrea for the next 2 decades, an area which stretched from Massawa to Suakin in Sudan. The territory became an Ottoman province or eyalet known as the Habesh Eyalet. Massawa served as the new province's first capital. When the city became of secondary economical importance, the administrative capital was soon moved across the Red Sea to Jeddah. Its headquarters remained there from the end of the 16th century to the early 19th century, with Medina temporarily serving as the capital in the 18th century. The Ottomans were eventually driven out in the last quarter of the 16th century. However, they retained control over the seaboard until the establishment of Italian Eritrea in the late 1800s. Italian Eritrea. The boundaries of the present-day Eritrea nation-state were established during this scramble for Africa. In 1869 or 70, when the ruling Sultan of Rahata sold lands surrounding the Bay of Assab to the Rubatino Shipping Company. The area served as a coaling station along the shipping lanes introduced by the recently completed Suez Canal. It had long been part of the Ottoman Habesh Eyalet centered in Egypt. The first Italian settlers arrived in 1880. In the vacuum that followed the 1889 death of Emperor Johannes II, Gen. Oreste Baratieri occupied the highlands along the Eritrean coast, and Italy proclaimed the establishment of the new colony of Italian Eritrea, a colony of the Kingdom of Italy. In the Treaty of Wuchale signed the same year, King Menek of Shewa, a southern Ethiopian kingdom, recognized the Italian occupation of his rivals' lands of Bogos, Hamasien, Akalgozai, and Serra in exchange for guarantees of financial assistance and continuing access to European arms and ammunition. His subsequent victory over his rival kings and enthronement as Emperor Menelik II made the treaty formally binding upon the entire territory. In 1888, the Italian administration launched its first development projects in the new colony. The Eritrean Railway was completed to Sati in 1888, and reached Asmara in the highlands in 1911. The Asmara-Massawa cableway was the longest line in the world during its time, but was later dismantled by the British in World War II. Besides major infrastructural projects, the colonial authorities invested significantly in the agricultural sector. It also oversaw the provision of urban amenities in Asmara and Massawa, and employed many Eritreans in public service, particularly in the police and public works departments. Thousands of Eritreans were concurrently enlisted in the army, serving during the Italo-Turkish War in Libya as well as the First and Second Italo-Abyssinian Wars. Additionally, the Italian Eritrea administration opened a number of new factories, which produced buttons, cooking oil, pasta, construction materials, packing meat, tobacco, hide and other household commodities. In 1939, there were around 2,198 factories and most of the employees were Eritrean citizens. The establishment of industries also made an increase in the number of both Italians and Eritreans residing in the cities. The number of Italians residing in the territory increased from 4,600 to 75,000 in 5 years, and with the involvement of Eritreans in the industries, trade and fruit plantation was expanded across the nation, while some of the plantations were owned by Eritreans. In 1922, Benito Mussolini's rise to power in Italy brought profound changes to the colonial government in Italian Eritrea. After Il Duce declared the birth of the Italian Empire in May 1936, Italian Eritrea and Italian Somaliland were merged with the just conquered Ethiopia in the new Italian East Africa Administrative Territory. This fascist period was characterized by imperial expansion in the name of a new Roman Empire. Eritrea was chosen by the Italian government to be the industrial center of Italian East Africa. British administration. Through the 1941 Battle of Keren, the British expelled the Italians, and took over the administration of the country. The British placed Eritrea under British military administration until Allied forces could determine its fate. In the absence of agreement amongst the Allies concerning the status of Eritrea, British administration continued for the remainder of World War II and until 1950. During the immediate post-war years, the British proposed that Eritrea be divided along religious lines and annexed to Sudan and Ethiopia. The Soviet Union, anticipating a communist victory in the Italian polls, initially supported returning Eritrea to Italy under trusteeship or as a colony. Arab states, seeing Eritrea as an extension of the Arab world, sought the establishment of an independent state federation with Ethiopia in the 1950s. The Ethiopian feudal administration under Emperor Haile Selassie sought to annex Eritrea and Italian Somaliland. He laid claim to both territories in a letter to Franklin D. Roosevelt at the Paris Peace Conference and at the first session of the United Nations. In the United Nations, the debate over the fate of the former Italian colonies continued. The British and Americans preferred to cede all of Eritrea except the western province to the Ethiopians as a reward for their support during World War II. The independence bloc of Eritrean parties consistently requested from the UN General Assembly that a referendum be held immediately to settle the Eritrean question of sovereignty. Following the adoption of UN Resolution 390A in December 1950, Eritrea was federated with Ethiopia under the prompting of the United States. The resolution called for Eritrea and Ethiopia to be linked through a loose federal structure or under the sovereignty of the emperor. Eritrea was to have its own administrative and judicial structure, its own flag, and control over its domestic affairs, including police, local administration, and taxation. The federal government, which for all intents and purposes was the existing imperial government, was to control foreign affairs, defense, finance, and transportation. The resolution ignored the wishes of Eritreans for independence, but guaranteed the population democratic rights and a measure of autonomy. Independence in 1958, a group of Eritreans based in Cairo founded the Eritrean Liberation Movement. The organization mainly consisted of Eritrean students, professionals and intellectuals. Under the leadership of Hamid Idris Awati, it engaged in clandestine political activities intended to cultivate resistance to the centralizing policies of the imperial Ethiopian state. However, by 1962, the elm had been discovered and destroyed by imperial authorities. When Emperor Haile Selassie unilaterally dissolved the Eritrean parliament and annexed the country in 1962, the Eritrean Liberation Front waged an armed struggle for independence. The ensuing Eritrean War for Independence went on for 30 years against successive Ethiopian governments until 1991, when the Eritrean People's Liberation Front, a successor of the ELF, defeated the Ethiopian forces in Eritrea and helped a coalition of Ethiopian rebel forces take control of the Ethiopian capital Addis Ababa. Following a UN-supervised referendum in Eritrea in which the Eritrean people overwhelmingly voted for independence, Eritrea declared its independence and gained international recognition in 1993. The EPLF seized power, established a one-party state along nationalist lines and banned further political activity. There have been no elections since.